Wow. Too bad I don't have like door prizes for farthest farthest connection. So all the way in England, we have someone joining. Well, thank you, Katya, for joining today. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So welcome to this webinar. We are going to cover some information that I think and I hope you'll find actually empowering and motivating. A lot of data talks can really kind of bog us down, and you end up feeling like inadequate and defeated. And that's not what we're about today. We're going to be talking about overcoming some challenges that plague essentially everyone. And we're going to talk about how you can be more effective. So while we're waiting for more poll responses and whatnot, let me go ahead and introduce myself a little further. So my name is Lori McNeill. I'm the founder of the Civic Hacker Network, which is the org sponsoring this webinar. The Civic Hacker Network is a networking and resource hub for people creating change in their communities using data and technology. And I am also an analytics consultant. I have been for about 15, 20 years now. Gosh, what year is it, right? So, I work with enterprises to help them get value out of their investment in marketing technologies by providing strategic and technical implementation services. And I really wanted to do this webinar because it has been a consistent theme. And now that I am pivoting to working more with NGOs and nonprofits, you see this pervasive issue of folks that get engaged with the vendor, and collecting data is not really a problem. They say it's data is the new oil, right? Data everywhere. But really, people are struggling with actually getting a return on that investment in their data and getting value out of the data. So, I just wanted to reach out to my audience and just kind of do a baseline training, if you will, on how to collect data that you'll actually use rather than just continuing to collect more and more data. So my background is actually in engineering, and although I have pivoted my career to analytics, I'm still quite active and passionate about educational outreach to teach kindergarten through 12th grade students about engineering and about STEM careers in general. So when I'm not working on that, I'm trying to get in touch with other kids and hopefully make that first spark happen. And also, I'm a mom, so in these pandemic times, that means that I have the privilege of both raising and part-time, anyway, homeschooling my elementary school age son and daughter, who are right now eerily quiet. So I think that probably Mrs. iPad is babysitting them while we go through this training. And probably some of you can identify with that dance right now. And before we get into our poll results, I do have another fun fact to share about myself. I have a bit of a collecting habit when it comes to magazines. I really love my magazines. I have moved them from place to place. They're like, my third kid. I've some of the magazines I've kept are probably older than some of you. At one point, I had over 400 magazines. Don't be concerned for me. I have pared it down some. And while I adore my collection and love flipping through the pages whenever I need, a mental vacation, the magazines represent a collection of information that I don't actually use. And that is actually kind of hard for me to use at that scale. While I could use some of the information out of them, and I do from time to time, it's more likely that I'm going to Google something, I'll Google a recipe or a book recommendation rather than try to find something from among this stack, these stacks of magazines that I've collected. And it took me actually having to count the magazines while packing them up for a move to finally admit, okay, this is a bit out of hand. So they say the first step to something better is admitting you have a problem. So we'll see how I do with my magazines. In the meantime, let's see if we have any more. Done the poll. I can share the results. Okay. Oh wait, they're already visible to you guys. So yeah, so we have some that send data reports to other people, and some that are doing everything for themselves. I know the feeling of that for sure. All right, great. So we are gonna move on here. Probably a lot of you have seen one of these kind of race car slides, some people call them. These collections that tell you the landscape of a given industry. The marketing technology has a lot of these popular type graphics. But even though this one's actually kind of old, it's from 2014 or 13, it still, illustrates the point that, there's no shortage of tools to help us collect data from our web and mobile apps. And of course, the promise of each next, most recently HEAP, has been something that the client came to me about. They were excited about the possibilities of HEAP analytics and what they could accomplish. And, something about these, obviously, if it's a paid tool, there's a sales pitch to be made. So, we are constantly enticed with these promises from vendors about what's going to happen if we use them to collect our data. So, Google Analytics, their website says, they'll let you measure your advertising ROI as well as track your flash, video, and social networking sites and applications. And certainly, so the capabilities are there. Crazy Egg, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the heat mapping software. That's definitely relevant here. It's part of one of the ways, and it can be a very important way to collect data that is actually useful. So Crazy Egg promises that we can use it to see what's hot and what's not, and to know what our web visitors are doing with tools such as heat maps, recordings, A/B testing, and more. And we need to add more because we're not overwhelmed enough. Right. And then one of the biggest players in the space, Adobe Analytics, says on their website, only Adobe lets you mix, match, and analyze data from anywhere in the customer journey. Plus, get versatile reporting, predictive intelligence, and more. Because more of more is what people are about in the vendor landscape, it seems, when it comes to data. And so, we've been promised that we're going to crush all of our business goals, but the fact is, in my almost 2 decades of working in this space, and previously even in engineering and doing research, these promises are not ever something that really fully shows up without more work and more customization. So we've got all these tools, and we're back to this collection problem that we need to actually admit to ourselves. Yoga magazine is not going to come do the poses for me. My Wood and Boat magazine editors are not ever going to just show up with the varnishes that I need to try. And by the way, that's aspirational. I've never made a wooden boat. And so using this information requires some additional work beyond just acquiring it. And the same goes for the data that you're collecting or hoping to collect. This struggle is real. It's not confined to digital. And it is, pervasive in folks that are dealing with digital marketing and app analytics and the like. So whether you're at a Fortune 500 company or a tiny NGO, merely collecting some web app web or app data is not your challenge in all likelihood. The challenges come when we realize that no tool actually delivers on its promise out of the box. There's more that we need to do. That's what we're going to talk about to collect data that can and will be used by our organization. So where does this leave us? How do we get data that we can actually use and not just collect? Where I like to go when I'm working with people on this issue, we're talking about overcoming challenges, right? Not getting bogged down. So if you're feeling that way, don't worry, we're changing the tune here. So I always start with people thinking about the second of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that is, to begin with the end in mind. And I don't think he is actually the original person that said that part, but he did put together the 7 habits. And he said to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going so that you better understand where you are now, and so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. So that the steps that you take in your data collection are in the direction of being useful, being valuable. And where I've seen the tightest kind of connection and cycling of collecting and then using data iteratively is actually, and probably some of you have been exposed to this world, is in testing practices. With any clients that I have worked with or in various corporate roles, when we're working in the testing and optimization space, or a test and learn type program, we see that the activities around, say, like subject line testing, conversion rate optimization testing, any direct marketing, paid search, that these kind of testing tools are built into those platforms. A lot of times all these activities depend on collecting specific data, being laser focused, right, on there's a certain overall evaluation criterion, some people call it in that space. So they're collecting specific data, they're analyzing it, and then from the very beginning, from the get-go, they already are having in mind why they're collecting data and how they're going to use it. And so the end that they have in mind, what they're envisioning, is effectively, and how we're going to think about this as our strategy for success, is that we're effectively having a data product. It's going to be, in the case of optimization testing, this data product tells them what kind of, what subject line is better for them to use, for the remaining of their list that they've held out. Or it's going to tell us, what drives higher email open rates. This data product can tell us which zip codes are the best to mail to, if we're talking about direct mail and offline space. So in any case of using data, I think we can look to the example of the optimizer who uses their data as, data is a product, even in a testing platform, right? They're using it that way. And so there's guaranteed almost decision-making that's going to be happening. And so the productization of data takes what could be a fruitless and endless fishing expedition. I'm sure many of you have felt that way when you're just kind of going into your tool and going down that rabbit hole. Or if you are not using any type of analytics tool, maybe you retrieve data from a database, you have to ask a dev, or you do it yourself. Fishing for, okay, what query do I need to put forward here to get the information I need? So, if we kind of take this mindset of the optimizer and productize that data internally as a product, then we're turning that fishing expedition into a discrete moment of clarity. And so one question you might ask then is, well, why is it that type of clarity, why is that experience of having useful data so kind of siloed into the domain of optimization testing. And I would say that, part of that is, culture and vendor driven, but, it doesn't have to be this way. You can, and, we will adopt the same strategy of productizing your data, meaning collecting your data and having that be the inputs for a defined result that has value to you and your organization. This strategy focuses us on defining internal data products that ensure data is collected, that can and will be used, and it's what takes you and your organization to that next level of not just being a magazine hoarder, not just collecting data, but actually using it. So now let's talk about a little bit about strategic framework that can help us. I like this one from Gartner, especially when we are talking about internal data products, because it demonstrates kind of the different flavors of how we use data for, assessing and driving improvements in our websites and apps. You can see that they've got, the y-axis here, kind of a heuristic indication of value, and then we have difficulty on the x-axis. And so as you go from just describing what happened, how many visitors, how much time on site, what pages viewed, that is kind of low effort, and, subsequently it can be a lower value data product, that descriptive data report or analysis. But then as you move up and to the right, you're seeing things like data that asks the question why something happened. So maybe we are looking at something that's more of a diagnostic, looking at what will happen in the future. Predictive analytics is a way you can go with using your data to kind of project. Our finance people, are kind of the most comfortable in doing this on a routine basis. But, again, this is not something that's limited to that domain. And then how can we actually make something happen in the future, which is what we all want. I always, have believed and preached that, you should know what to do after you spend time with your data. It should be prescriptive. What are you going to do to make the outcome that you're interested in seeing? And so, but once you get there, you're looking at, according to this model, something that is it's more difficult than, say, just your descriptive analytics, which is what we tend to get out of the box with any given data tool, or even, what our development team might parse our log files, into for us. But, with a little more effort and analysis, we're heading from just information to optimization and foresight. And so the question that, this strategic framework has us ask ourselves is, what type of data product is in demand in our organization? Because it's not one size fits all. There may be plenty of value locked into a diagnostic type analysis of your data for your organization. The prescriptive may be not something that needs to be invested in at the moment. So what's the priority for your organization and what you're needing to do and accountable for getting out of your data? And then also why? So, I know I've been in situations where folks are very excited about predictive analytics. It was very buzzwordy, at one time. And if you ask, your stakeholder or your boss, they would say, oh yeah, that thing. I read about that in Harvard Business Review, and that is what type of product I want coming out of our data to use internally. And so then the question is why? Is it because it's the hottest thing, or is it really, tied to the business goals or the organization's goals of what they're trying to achieve? So what type of data product is in demand and why are two of kind of the strategic questions that we want to be thinking about before we as kind of the groundwork to prepare us to get that more useful data. And then, when we're making plans after we've got our, chosen strategy agreed upon and nailed down, there are a few considerations that we definitely want to go through. We've been sold on collecting all of this data on our digital properties. We're going to apply this strategic lens, and that Gartner model, again, is just one example that I'm fond of, but there are others. And so we make the necessary investment in planning, and this will allow us to make use of the data that we collect and realize the value that everybody keeps talking about. So, begin with the end in mind. Start with the business questions and your goals. From that, usually falls out some reporting or analysis requirements, or both. So as you're looking at, answering the question of, why did more people respond to our flash sale than, on Tuesday morning than Tuesday night? Why do we have more people from this district using our, civic engagement app than another district? So answering these questions, from them will fall out, okay, this is the information that I hypothesize that I need to know to get at that issue. And, this is another kind of aspect of the problem, is that a vendor doesn't have the domain knowledge that you have. And it's something, really important. I like to remind people that, the business requirements, that domain knowledge, is something that only you can bring, and putting that together with your data is where you're successful, regardless of the tool. So then, we've got measurement requirements. After, again, you've started at the end in stages 1 and 2. This is more looking at what that product's going to be. And then, you'll have your measurement requirements. So, what do you need to measure? Where do you need to place the tracking in order to get the information that feeds up into the end product? And then also, it is really the best time to think about governance issues. So how are you going to maintain this data product? What's going to be your validation, method, so that we can make sure that things don't fall apart after we've done that first pass. And if we need to visit the issue again, we're not having to start from scratch. Governance, is kind of the term, an umbrella of how you're dealing with that kind of longevity, extending the shelf life of your work here. And then finally, you're going to need some type of technical specification. We are talking about digital, so there is going to be a technical aspect to this, of course. And so whether it's something that you yourself is going to, you're going to deal with in terms of, getting any type of additional tracking set up, or if it's something you're going to hand off to a vendor, a developer internally, or someone you hire, that is, going to be a next step to make sure that you don't miss anything and that the instructions are clear. Okay, so this is one of my least favorite questions, actually. So we were employing this strategic lens of an optimizer, not an observer. We're going to look to data to actively participate in improving outcomes for our organization, whether we measure it in profits or adoption or reach or what have you. And we've done the upfront work, if we're following this process, of defining what those internal data products are going to be and what they're going to be used for by surfacing those business questions, defining requirements. And now we have gotten to our specification that says, here are the data inputs that we need to create these data products and get use out of this stuff. And that at that point, you learn that you don't have all of the data readily available for you to use out of the box from your tool or your database or whatever you're using. Maybe you're collecting data on the screens that a user sees, but then, the data that wasn't getting collected in the box is whether or not that user is logged in, or the way your search feature works, and maybe it's fancy. I've seen a lot of React these days, and that doesn't automatically feed into a log entry or a hit to an analytics tool that tells you what the search term is or that the search even happened. So these little things, these cases, once you start actually looking at how you use your data, that's when these things start popping up that, oh, actually, we need to do a little bit of extra work to get this information. So this is completely normal. It doesn't mean anybody messed up or missed anything. And this is normally the point at which I start getting a lot of questions that start with the phrase, hey, can we track, or can I track? And the answer is it's always been yes. Where there's a will, there's a way, generally, for the reasonable requests. And, even when they're not reasonable, we can think about proxy information. And so, again, collecting the data is not the issue. And, because the pre-work in this case, following these strategies, you've done the homework that provides a clear direction. So you can put in the work needed to get this custom data with confidence, knowing that you're not wasting anybody's time because you're actually going to use this info and get value out of it. So for this next part, we're going to get into some of the weeds around digital data collection. And I am curious, how many of you are very familiar with these terms on the screen. We got tagging, tag management systems, data layer. I know if you're having to do everything yourself, you probably have come across them. Those who are more on the analysis side, maybe there's somebody else taking care of certain things. So we want to make sure that everybody's got the same understanding of what I'm talking about. So tagging, you hear about that a lot. It's the client-side scripts, primarily dealing in JavaScript in this world, that you're going to use. Tags are referred to both in terms of like installing your data collection vendor, but also tracking individual elements on a page. We call that tagging, because again, you're just adding a little coding snippet. Tag management systems. The tag management system is something that really makes it possible for people who are not on the engineering team, not the devs, people like you and I, who are very invested in the data that's being collected and want to have some level of control over what gets implemented and when, the speed with which it gets implemented. And just kind of managing that side, takes the load off of the dev team. So tag management systems are an interface and a bit of code that was called container that allows you to deploy and implement different tags, Facebook tags, or even some additional tracking beacons and tags from the separate interface, without having to necessarily be a part of the main development of the site or app and release schedule. And so finally, the third and probably the most important term that goes along with this bundle is a data layer. And so this is, if you're not familiar, it's a JavaScript object that we can use to elegantly and clearly pass some key value pairs of describing what is being served up on the page or information about a customer. It's just information that's put in this JavaScript object, and it makes it easy for a tag management system or any other kind of bit of JavaScript to grab that information. So it's like your tag's own little information database on the page about whatever you want to surface, or your developers can surface for you about what's going on with your app or your user. So these are kind of three key technical things that come into play when we are looking at the nitty-gritty of actually collecting this custom data that we've identified to help us use our data. So it's helpful to think about two sides of the measurement equation. So you have what you need to collect actually on site or in-app, using your analytics vendor, or if you're using logs or any, whatever the data collection is, the code is actually in your app or on your site. And then you have the category of tracking that is actually external, but it's also really important. And generally this is completely in the control of a non-developer. So this is where we talk about like your UTM parameters or any other parameters that your site might understand. And so this, tagging your inbound links. Other things include like voice of customer type data collection, or listening, social listening, social media activity. Actually, I want to just highlight this nest of on-site and in-app measures. We do have our basics, and kind of the deeper you go is where you're needing to have more of that customization, where things are not necessarily ready for you out of the box with however you're collecting your data, but there's an extreme, that higher value proposition comes with the kind of data products that you're actually going to use internally. So, doing basic page or screen tracking is one thing, but the deeper questions start being answered when we are able to measure users' interactions with specific elements or features, and solve all of those conference room debates with data about what's included and what's being invested in development or not. Behavioral tagging. So again, we're measuring, trying to measure what a user may be actually doing, if they're spending time in certain places, making it easy to understand pathing with how we're collecting our data, and then actually identifying specific users, which, depending on your vertical, what kind of app we're looking at, sometimes it's built in that, and in fact it's more increasingly common to actually enable tracking in the era of so many tracking blockers, to actually do more with having users be logged in, requiring it even in cases, some cases for people to even use the app, and then using the fact that them, staying away from PI, personally identifiable information, but using the information that about them in your database to actually enhance that other usage data that's kind of further out in the nest here, and derive more value from that information. So this is just an example. So I'm going to ask you, this is a economic development site locally here in my Smoky area. These pictures, definitely show us on a not smoky day. So, if you were the person or persons or team responsible for getting results from this type of initiative, this economic development situation, pitching the area, what kind of things do you think that you would want to know So talking about, collecting data here, what kind of things would you want to know about this particular page? So you can kind of drop some things in the chat. We'll brainstorm together. If you were responsible, what do you think you would want to make sure you were measuring? What was included in your data products around this? Any guesses? Like, I know for my case, the thing that jumps out first, of course, is there's a call to action, right, to download information. There's a call to action to contact them. So there are, this is a simple case, but depending on who has implemented, the data collection or what they've got going on here, this may require some custom work and configuration to answer questions about, well, who's downloading this PDF anyway? And, when are people contacting us? And maybe tying that in with data on the back end about the response times and outcomes. So there's another factor, of course, when we think about our model of, what gets measured on the page versus what gets measured externally. So we would, of course, want to make sure that we've had the foresight to make sure we used URL parameters if we're sending links in, or vanity URLs are sometimes used, maybe for a trade show, or we could have made sure to pass some type of variable to be able to have the full data set required to put together a useful data story around what we are or aren't achieving with this initiative. And another important point that I want to make here at this point is that, any data tool, your database, whatever it is, can only tell you what you've told it, right? There's nothing magical going on here. It's like, I kind of think of it like wearing a badge at a conference. So if there's just, a simple name badge, just by virtue of me putting that on, you can tell me what my name is and maybe my organization. If we are getting a little more fancy, maybe there's a scan code or a QR code on the badge. And so then just by putting on that badge, we are now, telling you everything that I entered into the conference registration. And my children are expiring, it sounds like. And telling you everything that I entered into the conference registration, and maybe the conference has added value to the vendor that is scanning my barcode at the conference by adding in maybe my firmographic data to send along with whatever I had entered in my conference registration. So at the end of the day, no one gets to know any information that hasn't already been set up and riding along with my badge. So it's a similar situation with your data collection. Some tools or code packages have built-in scripts that provide the data you need just by virtue of you installing it. Inevitably, there's going to be customization required to get you data that crosses that usefulness threshold. And that's what we're talking about here. So how do we get the data we need to complete this picture? And this is why I spent some time talking about tag management systems and data layers. I promise you I'm not selling tag management system software, but I would be remiss to tell you that we're going to talk about collecting data that you'll actually use without actually bringing up these tools that are currently, at least with the current state of the art, this is where we're at for your best bet to get the data that you need without having to tie up developer resources or procure them in some cases every time you need something tracked. If you at least have a tag management system in place, and the one that I work with the most is Google Tag Manager. It's free, and it opens the door for folks like us to operate with some independence and get the data that we're needing sooner rather than later. So you do have to roll up your technical sleeves a little bit. And some of these things, we talked about the data layer. That's really the ideal case and way to enhance your data collection with additional information about your users. But the hackery, I call it here, kind of comes in those cases where maybe you don't have that data layer in place, but just know that you can do some things still, and tag management systems have actually really come a long way with making it a little less difficult for people that don't write JavaScript for a living to be able to get information, even if the data layer isn't fully populated and perfect. So, the one big data hack that I'm going to share today is just talking about getting the data you need from existing variables and page elements. And so what do I mean by this? So we're looking at some use cases where this might happen is having to do with using page elements to detect. So things on the page is what I'm talking about. When I talk about page elements, things you can see to get at the visitor state, whether they're logged in or logged out. Visitor profile information might be something that is surfaced on the page. Product, or in the app, the product information, if we're talking about e-commerce, some of the metadata around products is actually surfaced right there on the page. And any special features, color choosers or other configuration type tools, those impressions of that, whether they're present or absent, is something that would be a use case where we're picking up on page elements to collect data that we need. In the terms of variables, this is where we do have to roll up our technical sleeves here in the digital space and maybe use our browser's developer tools to see what variables are already just globally available to your tag management system, to be able to pick up maybe a user ID or a values that get populated into a form by the user. Other metadata like keywords, right, is something that maybe you're wanting to pull into your data to add color to whatever analysis you're doing. And then, of course, if you're doing any personalization or optimization testing, those vendors, a lot of times the variables that they are using are actually available to your other data collection tools. So in this example, it's an oldie but goodie, but I really like the color scheme. So in this example, we have one view of the website where you're logged out and one view where you're logged in. And the difference is actually really small. If for some reason, you weren't able to get that in the data layer, look at the highlighted bit at the very top of the page. And in one case, if you're logged out, it asks you to sign in. In another case, it is saying welcome, if it knows who you are. So this is something that actually you can use element tracking to be able to then turn that into a variable that goes along with this visitor's data to say whether or not they're logged out or logged in when they take specific actions. So, that's kind of one small example. And then, of course, in this case, there is actually also a global variable that's available that, when a person's logged in versus when they're not, if you wanted to, because it is risky to use things visible on the page. Like I said, that's not the best practice, but if we're talking about data hacks, you don't have to be, you have to sit there waiting for your dev team if you just need something like this and you have a tag management system in place. So actually using our data, set that data product free to be used by the stakeholders who need it. And there's, several ways that you can do this, but, this is kind of the last little piece. If we've taken that strategic kind of mindset about productizing our data, having a fixed kind of outcome or decision, a defined decision aid that we're looking to create when we go to pull out data and do analysis. A lot of times that needs to go somewhere, right? And so sometimes that can be a barrier in and of itself to using data. So even in the planning process, if you don't already have a good system or good processes for getting your data product to the stakeholders who need it, that is, can be part of that governance discussion of how you're going to move that data around your organization. And, there are nowadays, there's a lot of options to actually automate this and make your life easier. If you're looking at any of the given, analytics tools, of course, they have built-in dashboards and ways to customize reports so that, at a click of a button, your product is already going to be available to deliver to your stakeholders. There are also, alerts that you can set up in various platforms. So the API extensions are referring to things like scripts. I know that with Google Analytics, for example, there are scripts you can use in Google Sheets to automate refreshing a given data product that you've got going. There are API connections to various data tools that you can use to pull into some of these third-party data visualization tools that are popular now, like Tableau. And so, we have ways to automate, and, not just for the sake, obviously it saves you time, but also when you think about, a product, going back to our example of our optimizers, the data that's collected from an experiment or a test, it's already delivered and packaged up and ready to go. If those platforms were just offering people the raw results and you had to do your analysis over again every time, nobody would pay for them. Well, okay, maybe some people would, but obviously there'd be a quick competitive advantage for the platform that did go ahead and package that up and have it delivered in an automated fashion. So it will increase, the usefulness and value you get out of your data if that distribution isn't a barrier in your organization. So we're heading into time here, but I hope that you have a clearer picture now of what's required and what it looks like to set yourself up for success using your data, and seeing kind of that work that needs to take place before you've even implemented a single tracking tag or done any customization. And again, when we focus and when we adopt the focus and mindset of an optimizer, we can productize our data and close the gap between data collection and data usage. And we also know that, there are certain tools of the trade nowadays, like a tag management system, like the data layer, that actually empower us to make needed customizations in our data and help us to fit those requirements that those thoughtful requirements that we invest in creating to support using our data. So with that, I thank you for joining me. Some of you are here early and some of you are winding down the day, like our friend in England. And definitely, I appreciate you joining. Thank you for your time. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. There's, my email address is shown here, and kind of my LinkedIn and Twitter. So there's different places you can find me. There's a survey that should come up after the session closes, and so I welcome your feedback there. And you can also let me know there if you would like a consultation appointment. And that's a great option if you've been listening to this session and getting ideas and having the wheels turning about things you want to try, but maybe you have some questions or need a little bit more information. So please fill out that survey. And if you want to know what's going on with my work with the Civic Hacker Network, here are some of those links. You can check out what we've got going there. I love working with NGOs and people kind of working on civic technology. I, definitely see where those folks, are a little bit behind industry. They don't have that necessarily that profit motive, but their mission can be well served by mastering some of these techniques and strategies that we are working on in digital. So definitely, if there's interest, we'd love to see you over there. And that will conclude this webinar for today. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and we'll talk or connect online with me, hopefully, and we'll see you on the next one.